Today, we're addressing a complaint that comes up pretty much whenever I talk about a build that has originated in the pro scene. For example, a build that was originally used in the SPL. Whenever I post any video regarding that, somebody in the comment section will most certainly say, well, I built this years before, I built this month before, how is this news now? And just because the pros build it, it's suddenly good and it wasn't good beforehand, what the hell? And there are quite a few other complaints that come along with it, which I'd like to address in this video. The first one is a very straightforward and simple one. If you complain about pro players being called professionals, then you should look into what the word pro means. Pro stands for professional. They're called professional players because they play in the SMITE Pro League. That means they usually play under an org's name in most scenarios. They usually have a decent chance at winning at least some level of prize earnings. They get certain things sponsored by Hi-Rez as well, for example flights to events and so on. All of these basically implies that they are pro players. If you personally think that a pro player doesn't play well enough to be a pro player, that is one thing. If you feel like he shouldn't get paid for the level of play that he plays on. It's very entitled to say that, but that's your opinion. But if you say a pro player that's currently playing in the SPL is not a pro because he doesn't play well enough, you're just plain wrong. As long as he's playing in the SMITE Pro League, he is a pro player. It's possible to discuss whether a pro player should also be somebody who plays in the Challenger Cup, for example, or what happens to an ex-pro player if he's still considered a pro because he plays on the same level as those people. But those who are in the SPL are, by any definition, pro players. These pro players spend a significant portion of their day playing SMITE. How much exactly depends on the player. Out of that time, a lot of time is spent in scrims. Scrims are where the pro teams practice against each other, try out tactics and try to improve and learn from the mistakes they make as a team, coordinate better, get feedback from their coach and everything that is kind of surrounding that, everything that helps them improve as players in order to have the best performance possible in the SPL, in the SMITE Pro League. Many things that are done in the scrims are things that you will never see. They test out a lot of tactics. For example, they test out if certain guard combinations work very well, or if certain item combinations on certain characters synergize well with another character, or things like that. And a lot of that will never see the light of day if it shows not to be as successful as they hoped for. Only the most effective tactics make it from the scrims into the Pro League, because obviously in the Pro League you're looking to win, so you want to use the most effective tactics that seem to work out for you the best. Occasionally, you will see things from scrims leaking into the scene. For example, with Sunder this was the case. Sunder was very popular along the pros long before it was popular in any other level of play. And it was pretty known at some point that it was used a lot in scrims. So before Sunder got nerfed, it got popular even though it wasn't really seen in the SPL at that point. Even though it got a lot more popular again after it was seen in the SPL. You will also notice that almost every pro player has their profile hidden for this very reason. They do not want people to be able to look at their scrims, which is still possible on the Hi-Rez website as far as I know. So they don't want anyone to see what kind of builds they're testing, what kind of team combinations they're testing and so on, and that would otherwise all be visible. This also means that a pro player will often hold back tactics from ranked if they are streaming. For example, they may not use a certain item combination that they think is really strong, or a guard that they consider very, very strong, simply because they don't want anyone to see that they play this guard a lot, or that they use this new item and it works very effectively for them in ranked, because it might as well work in scrims as well. And among teams in scrims, it's usually kind of agreed upon that nothing gets, well, told to other teams. You don't tell any other team if a guard has been picked a lot by your scrim partners, because otherwise you probably end up with no scrim partners, as no one likes somebody who tells this stuff to other people. So what if stuff makes it to the SMITE Pro League? It will be seen by a lot of people. 10,000 people usually watch the stream, roughly around that number, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it doesn't really matter. It's definitely enough people in order to be able to say that these builds will be more popular, or these strategies or these characters, because those people will see these strategies and will be like, okay, I want to try that myself. I want to take that into my ranked games or my casual games. I want to see how well I do with that. And if a tactic seems to work out very well, then it will transfer over more. Not everything that's seen in the SPL will translate over. Certain things just work better when you have a coordinated team. Certain characters are a lot better in a coordinated team and don't necessarily work the same way if you pick them on your own in a casual. Likewise, there are guards that work much better if you play them on lower levels of play than they would ever in the SPL, so the meta kind of goes both ways here. And as I'm dropping the word meta already, let's talk about that. If something is seen in the SPL, is deemed a good strategy, is deemed a strong strategy that also makes sense for anyone else to pick up, it becomes meta. There are different metas for different game modes and different metas for different levels of play, but you will generally see a lot of the highest level of play, so SPL, being copied by lower levels of play with little regard on how effectively it will actually work, but often enough it will work out well enough simply because it has been tested on a high level for a very long time, and you can usually assume that it works okay at least on lower levels as well. I tried to find a good definition for a meta in a MOBA. I found a lot of different ones, but not really any that would sum it up in a way that I would like to have it covered, because it doesn't really describe everything. One that I found okay was, it's sort of an unofficial rule designed to make a certain type of champ or character in general go to certain places during the game. Pretty much, people who are top ranked do this, community must do the same. Thus the meta is born. I disagree with the must part. I feel like it's more like people want to do the same. They see this and they want to follow it. Though at some point it becomes a must if you get BM'd by your team for not doing exactly what they want to do according to the meta. But in the end, what it boils down to is you see something that works well on a high level of play and you do it yourself and everyone else around you does it, hence it becomes the meta. And that brings us back to the original complaint. But I did this in my casuals for ages. Just because the pros do it, it's suddenly meta? Yes, because they're pros, because they prove that it works on the highest level of play. They prove that it's a valid strategy, that's not just a pop stomp plan or whatever, but something that really works against the best players in the world. If you were to run Runic Shield Rush Osiris in your customs, your casuals, and maybe your ranked games to a certain division, you may be successful with it. You may be able to make it work simply because you have better mechanical skill than the players around you, and apparently they may have more item knowledge in comparison then, but they may have less mechanical skill, and that may compensate for it, and it may work effectively for you. But that doesn't mean that rushing Runic Shield on Osiris is anything that anyone should ever do. And no one can determine how mechanically skilled versus knowledgeable of the game you are, unless you're really playing on the highest level of play, where everyone is almost in an equilibrium when it comes to mechanical skill. Obviously there are still differences, but they are relatively minor in comparison. Likewise, you don't really have to follow that meta depending on your level especially. If you are in bronze and you play Anubis mid every game, you're probably gonna do pretty damn well, because Anubis is a god that needs a certain level of countering and team play, which is just not there in bronze. So in bronze, Anubis goes up in the meta by quite a lot, and it probably stays like that for quite a few ranked divisions above that. Almost no pro would advise you to play Anubis. There have been outlier cases, but hardly ever. Whereas it would still be a very valid strategy on that rank. It would be a different meta, it would be a low elo meta, which allows for different strategies. However, the more you move towards the top, the more you have to optimize. And only on the very highest level you will see if a strategy is valid for everyone. A prime example here would be Mystical Mail. At the beginning of the season, quite a few people thought that Mystical Mail is something that you should build right off the bat with a price tag that it had. That does work on a certain level of play, yes, because it's a lot of damage that comes from this item, and most teams will not be able to counterplay that. But if you look at the very high divisions, there is still the issue of the price gap. In the highest division, the difference between the two solo laners is not down to heavy mechanical skill differences, but rather optimizing your farm and just making the best out of the small power spikes that you get. What would happen there is somebody getting Steel Mail and not being able to buy another item for a very long time, which is Mystical Mail in this case, would probably get punished very hard by his opponent, who already rushed, for example, Breastplate of Valor in that moment, and would have the upper hand in that lane for such a long time that he would be able to optimize his farm over the enemy for a very long time. So Mystical Mail was not meta on the highest level of play. At some point, Deathwalker decided to include Mark of the Vanguard. Mark of the Vanguard allowed you to have this extra bridge item that would be good enough, at least, to allow you to sustain against someone who would have Breastplate of Valor already with Mark of the Vanguard plus Steel Mail. It would set you back by some gold, but the price efficiency on that item was so much better that it would give you enough survivability for that longer time period in between. This proved to work on the highest level of play, and we see it until this day. It's still a very commonly built combination right now. Just rushing Mystical Mail with that bad power curve was not comparable and only worked if you're playing against not evenly well-playing players, basically. Another thing in the same context is players saying they have been building something for a month, they knew this month before, when an item got changed. If you were building Runeforged Hammer a month ago, it was probably not that good, so good for you on building it, but it doesn't really matter to us, you know? What is, on the other hand, an appropriate comment in that context is, oh, I already liked Runeforged Hammer before and I have been using it, I'm glad it got buffed, now what I was building before is even stronger. That makes sense. If you liked it before, now it's probably more efficient. And last but not least, a word on content creators like me. We make builds sometimes, we make things, you know, to break the meta or whatever, but you have to take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, for example, I did the Rune Shift build, which was Runeforged Hammer and Shifter's Shield in combination with Frostbound Hammer, but I specifically stated that I don't think this is something for the pro level, but rather, you know, for lower ranked ranks and for casuals. And I believe in those situations it was very effective, and that was the feedback I got as well. But nothing of that is necessarily automatically meta, and that goes for pretty much any content creator out there, because the few content creators that are actually in the SPL, that are actually on pro level, are usually not doing build guides. Exceptions exist, but even then a lot is about just personal taste, and often you will just get a condensed version of all the situationals and all that kind of stuff. So it's something you can work with, and it's something that can be effective enough for you, but none of that will define how an SPL player plays unless you come up with something super exciting, a super strong strategy that no one had ever thought of. If you do, it's still a matter of getting your voice heard. You may have a good idea that works really well, but unless you have some sort of proof for it, some sort of video, some sort of thing that qualifies you, anything where you can show it to the pro players and be like, look guys, this is super good, try that out in your games, and they are willing to actually try it, it doesn't really matter all too much, unfortunately. The only time when that's not the case is when something is coming straight from the SPL and, for example, discussed in a video. I've done that a lot recently because I think it's very interesting to look into what strategies are applied there that may be developed somewhere else and how well they work. But to put it simply, and to bring this to a conclusion, you will not define the meta no matter what you do unless you have something so groundbreaking that it even impresses the pros, or you are a SPL level player. Those are scenarios where you can influence the meta. In most other cases, regardless of what you're building and how well you're doing, you probably won't. And that's totally okay. It doesn't stop you from playing whatever you like playing, and whatever works for you on the level you're playing on is totally fine, as long as it's good overall, no problem in that. But don't think that it's suddenly gonna be the meta, or don't complain when it's at some point picked up by the pros, maybe after things have already changed a lot, or maybe after it has been discovered. You never know how long it has been already going around in scrims before it was actually played in the SPL. With that, thank you guys for watching, I hope this was insightful and informative. Sorry about the late release of this video, and I was actually planning to do another video today. It took way longer than expected, it is on the third day now, so tomorrow will be the video that I was hoping to release 2 days ago by then. But I promise it'll be done tomorrow. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click that sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow for sure. Duke Sloth, out.